dynamic of the trial is really fascinating. And it's even more fascinating, of course, because at the end of the day, Gulen wins, which is highly unusual for political trials. I mean, all we have to do is look at Socrates, Jesus, the Inquisition, the women at Salem, John Scopes, those religious political trials that happened in our history. The other thing I really came to appreciate was the enormous sacrifice a lot of people have made in this change that has gone on, this amazing change that has gone on in Turkey that resulted in the referendum on September 12th, changing the Constitution and enhancing civil liberties and human rights. So great respect. And many people died. Many people were in exile. Many people were in prison for a long time. And I had the honor of meeting some of them. The Gulen movement, in a sense, represents, I think, the challenge of the challenge between the Anatolia bourgeoisie emerging and the old Istanbul bourgeoisie, or as somebody once told me, the white Turks versus the black Turks. That this is the change. This is and you think about this, this is a serious challenge to the status quo that essentially was unregulated and was basically dipping its fingers or its hands into the treasury and running its life the way that it wanted to run its life. You have the whole deep state problem that we see has come up in all of the documents released through the Ergenekon and the sledgehammer indictments, right? The interplay between all of these entities I just mentioned, the interplay and the tight military-industrial complex, and how the Gulen movement threatens that because it's a popular movement that nobody can get its hands on, right? In the way that we think about organizational stuff in the United States. And it's a threat because you can't control it. People see it happening in front of them, the establishment, the economic order, and it's a threat to them. And there are all sorts of other things going on too. You know, the interference with the drug trade that has become part of the deep state, or trafficking, or why is it that PKK does what it does when it does? Is it just stirring up violence in order to keep the repression going, in order to keep the reaction to support the military so you can have more conflict? All that dynamic that goes on, I think all leads to the prosecution of Fethullah Gulen. So, but the media in Turkey too, and the journalists and the print thing carry much more sway with people than they do in the United States. Journalists, for example, will appear on the front page of papers. They're paid very well. People pay attention to the political commentary. And so when you have this campaign start against Gulen, people look at it. Even people in the movement, I'm sure, said, wow, what's going on? Where there's smoke, is there fire? And that was part of what's going on. One of the good things that happened by chance, I interviewed the lawyer in May about this, pure chance. One of the lawyers says to Gulen one day in Izmir, why don't you start suing these people for defamation? And Gulen said, no, you know, I'm not like that. Well, anyway, it happened. The lawyer talked him into it. The good thing is that the lawyers were able to, they brought something like 300 cases altogether, all across Turkey. But the lawyers the fact that they got a huge number of judgments in the courts for defamation, they were able to use later on in the criminal trial to show that the allegations brought by the prosecutor were not true. Okay, what was the wild card? The wild card was the European Union, the accession agreements. Turkey was bound and determined to come into the European Union, and as a requisite for coming into the European Union, it had to change its legal system. Change its legal system meant abolishing the state security courts, meant allowing religious freedom, and it meant ensuring civil liberties. And it took Turkey a long time to come into compliance with those requirements in the accession agreements. It happens during the Gulen trial. That's why I call it the wild card. That is why Gulen wins the trial in the end. The indictment is awful if you read it. I mean, it's everything, all of this stuff, all of this trash stuff that was up here earlier, the secret cardinal, I mean, all of that stuff is in the indictment. And it looks like a cut and paste job, actually, that he'd end up Xeroxing or something. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's amazing the lack of integrity in bringing forward this criminal prosecution. But anyway, he does it. And of course, the day before he files the indictment, he leaks it to the press, you know, and all of that goes back and forth. Gulen is indicted as a terrorist. All the evidence, I mean, is clearly fabricated, but it's there, right? Or create that smoke. Where's there smoke, there's fire. And of course, the acquittal comes in the appeals court the same time that Gulen is acknowledged as one of the top 20 intellectual leaders in the world. So it's a good month for Gulen. But it was even better the next month. Because parallel to this, and if you don't believe in the deep state, you will after you hear this. Parallel to this, when Gulen was in the United States, he had applied to be a religious scholar. Now, and the US government said, no, you're not a religious scholar. What do you mean a picture of the Pope? Who took that picture? I'm not kidding. This isn't even, you know, I just got done bad-mouthing the indictment in Turkey. Well, you ought to read some of the United States Justice Department pleadings. Just absurd. Anyway, the judge at one point gets so fed up with this nonsense that he calls the lawyers in, as judges do when they get hacked off, and say, I want whoever's making that decision in front of me in 10 minutes. And the lawyer for the government says, Your Honor, this decision is coming higher than Homeland Security. And it's coming so high that I cannot get that person in front of you. So it narrows it down. We know Bush didn't think about this. So that narrows it down to either Cheney or Rumsfeld. And the judge says, yeah, whatever, and grants religious scholar status. 2 days after this happens, Gulen's attorneys made the decision not to release it to the press. I'm wrapping, this is my coda. Not to release it to the press because of the CIA agent thing, you know, just let it happen. Well, 2 days later, it was in the Turkish press. So somebody from the inside the United States government leaked it. Clarence Darrow, this is my wrap-up, okay? Clarence Darrow used to say that the law, and Clarence Darrow was a famous human rights lawyer in the United States, very earthy, used to say the law is the bastard child of justice. He was absolutely right. But in this sense, in this one instance in history, and I'm glad to have written the book about it, justice and the law coincided, and Turkey is better off in terms of religious freedom, in terms of democracy, and in terms of human rights, thanks to this trial.